the second session. It's Björn. So for this next talk, we have Björn Ruytenberg, and he is a security researcher in hardware, firmware, and OS security. He's also owner of Datafile, for which I once had the pleasure to have him work for the best cybersecurity master in the Netherlands. And now he's a PhD candidate at WU
Hello everyone, thank you for joining and for having me here at TU Eindhoven. My name is Björn Ruytenberg. I'm a PhD candidate at FUSEC at the University of Amsterdam. I'm a security researcher and maintainer of HyperUPG, which we'll be talking about in a bit. And my research mainly focuses on UEFI, hypervisor, and PCI Express security. Some of my previous work, as already mentioned, is critical Intel Thunderbolt vulnerabilities, which I had the pleasure of finishing as part of my master thesis here at TU Eindhoven. So, digital rights management, or DRM, is what we'll be talking about today. DRM protects high-value audio-video content served by the major streaming vendors. And the key idea behind DRM is not necessarily to make it entirely impossible to pirate content, but to make it very difficult or otherwise very unattractive to do so. And the idea is that, content pirates have to resort to either analog output or some digital conversion steps. And these methods should always come at a cost in terms of money, but also in terms of quality. And this goes especially for high-value content like 4K video and lossless audio, which are usually protected by a hardware-backed DRM pipeline. Which is in turn usually implemented using a trusted execution as it is called. Now, in short, the work that I'll be presenting today relies on the key insight that these hardware-backed DRM technologies provide really strong security guarantees, but they have never really considered the device I/O boundary, and so that is the key vulnerability that we're exploiting in our work. DRM comes in many different forms, and each come with a certain set of security guarantees. So software-based DRM is the most basic form, and this is how DRM started out for streaming media back in the early 2010s. So until this era, attacks mostly included capturing the screen or using virtual audio devices to capture the audio. But these loopholes were pretty soon closed at the operating system level or DRM runtime. And it is at this point that DRM started to be scrutinized in academia and in the industry. And so one of the papers that first started looking at this kind of questions is one that is aptly called Steal This Movie, as you can see on the right. And Steal This Movie was soon accompanied by the YouTube DL project, these days also known as YTDLP, which lets you download videos from YouTube. Whiteley and Narrowbeer, which we'll be talking a little bit about in a bit. Software-based DRM was in part improved by a hybrid software and hardware-based solution. Slightly better security guarantees were offered by this kind of setup where the encryption keys are stored in a trusted execution environment. And the idea is that the operating system never gets to access the key material. Now, there is one documented vulnerability, which you see right here by security explorations, but it was never publicly disclosed. The modern DRM landscape is mostly dominated by Google Wi-Fi and Microsoft PlayReady, and the examples that we saw in the previous slides are examples of attacks on the lower two tiers right here on the slide, including Google Wi-Fi L3 and Microsoft Clarity SS2000. The higher security tiers is where things start to get interesting. So with Google Wi-Fi L1, the encryption happens in a TE, like previously, but the plaintext material, the plaintext stream, never leaves the TE. It goes directly to the output device. And so the operating system never gets to access the plaintext stream. Plainready SS3000 at the bottom expands on that scheme by adding remote attestation of the entire Plainready technology stack, including the operating system kernel, the device drivers, and hardware, and including the detection of virtual hardware, like in the context of iPhones. Now, none of these hardware-based DRM tiers have been broken or bypassed so far. So that's what we're going to do. Let's bypass hardware-based DRM. In a nutshell, we have achieved a full DRM security protocol bypass across all major DRM systems at maximum security settings. And all of the major streaming vendors are impacted, including Amazon, Netflix, and Spotify. It's a fully software-based attack in the sense that we do not require any special kind of hardware, no HDMI switches, no terminators, no PCI Express bus interposers, or anything else you can think of. We also do not exploit any implementation flaws. No, we don't break any cryptographic primitives or compromise any remote licensing servers. Last but not least, we do require a privileged adversary, but so this means an attacker with root access or administrator privileges. But this privileged access is explicitly in scope for the DRM vendor level. And so our attack bypasses DRM right from the lowest tiers up until the maximum security tiers. Okay, so introducing modern DRM architecture. On the left, we have the streaming service CDN, like Netflix or Spotify, serving the content to the web browser, and the DRM user mode runtime then receives decryption keys from the licensing server, which are encrypted in the trusted execution environment public. So the TE is right at the bottom, implemented in the GPU. This is pretty much how the Plainready spec defines its DRM architecture, so that's not really a lot, as you can see. And for us, this leaves many open questions, right? So at what point is the stream decrypted? And at what point does the plaintext stream flow to the output device throughout this entire architecture? Now, to reverse engineering, we found out that after the TE decrypts the content, the stream is returned to the kernel mode DRM driver. And from that point on, a plaintext buffer is shared with the HD audio device driver, which in turn shares this plaintext stream in chunks via a direct memory buffer. Via the direct memory buffer. Pardon me, a DMA buffer that is sharing the chunks to the HD audio device. So, from the attacker's perspective, there's many options, right? So you could, for example, replace either of these device drivers with one that you control yourself, or you can replace the TE at the bottom with one that just reveals the keys. Fortunately for the attacker, it's not that easy. So first, the device drivers are WHQL signed, which is the Microsoft Windows code signing procedure. And the TE embeds a certificate that is trusted by a Plainready specific PKI. Second, the entire DRM runtime that you see here, including the OS kernel and finally the TE itself, are subject to attestation towards the Playwright licensing server. And so if you were to replace any of these, you would immediately fail Playwright attestation. Well, how about keeping everything in place, but then using a debugger to hook any of these, hook any functions in any of these components, right? Well, there is a bit of a problem with that. So Microsoft uses a tool that they developed internally called Warbird, and Warbird obfuscates all of this code. Now, there was a source code leak of Warbird, so you know, there's a side channel there that you can use, but still, it's quite complicated. Yeah, so maybe there are better options. Suppose that somehow you could deobfuscate the runtime, and you could hook interesting functions and, you know, do something useful there. There is a kernel runtime protection called patchguard. It's like a daemon that runs in the background, continuously checks for anything suspicious going on, as in anything that tries to hook kernel functions. And if it does catch you, then it will be associated with the kernel. So it's game over at that point. Okay, so what other options do we have then? Well, we know that Playwright does hypervisor detection, so we cannot fully virtualize the entire operating system and then just intercept all I/O to the HD audio device. What we can do is putting the operating system under so-called introspection, using a technique called virtual machine introspection. And here we do not virtualize the entire operating system, but only parts of the physical memory that we want to monitor, basically. So what we do is we put the OS under introspection with CMI, and we put a thin hypervisor layer in between that does I/O interception between the HD audio device driver and the HD audio device. Only virtualizing those parts of physical memory that are involved in I/O between those two. Diving a little bit deeper into the technical details, if you're interested. So, Dreamcatcher, as we call our attack, starts with discovering the DMA buffers. HD audio devices, they have several input and output streams, right? Microphone and multiple speakers or headphones you may have attached. And they expose them via the base address registers or bars. So what we do is scan these registers for the output stream that we're interested in, and find the registers that let us tell what the state of the stream is. So you see there's a stream status and a stream control. And so what we do is synchronize on these so-called DMA control registers to find out when the content in the DMA buffers is valid. So when the chunk of the audio stream is basically valid for us to make a copy of. And we do this continuously until we've completed capturing the entire song. Then we reconstruct it as a plaintext PCM bit stream, and then convert it to a WAV file that you can play in any modern media player. Some brief details on how this works under the hood. We use extended page tables. This is a CPU extension on Intel that lets you virtualize operating systems, but instead we use it for debugging purposes. So what basically happens is Dreamcatcher marks the memory mapped I/O regions as non-readable, and when the device driver touches any of those regions, we get a callback as a hypervisor, and we can then do inspection of the access. We can make a copy of the buffer that's being accessed, and then we re-enable driver execution, and we continuously do this in a loop until we've done the entire song. And then we resume driver execution, basically. So we implement all of this by extending HyperDBG. So in a nutshell, what is HyperDBG? Well, it's a hypervisor-based debugger project that my co-author, Sina Karvandi, also here somewhere in the audience, and I co-lead. I could fill another talk about how HybridGG works, but basically, at a high level, HybridGG uses hypervisor CPU extensions to build a debugger. And this opens up a lot of use cases that are normally not possible with traditional debuggers. If you're interested, it's open source. Feel free to grab it from our GitHub repo. And patches are more than welcome. Right, like I already mentioned, all of the major streaming services are affected all across the board. I'd like to add a special mention for Netflix, which uses the highest hardware-backed security levels, both implementing PlayReady SL3000 using a compatible GPU on the one hand, and Wi-Fi L1 on SGX, Intel SGX, where it's still supported on Intel CPUs. Also special mention for Spotify lossless. This was pretty interesting, and we only found out about this recently. Spotify apparently uses a DRAM that they developed in-house called Plaintext. Yeah, we didn't know about this. It's not really well documented. For us, however, there was basically no difference. The attack works just as well with Plaintext. And for Apple Music lossless, we could not identify DRAM at all. There is something called FairPlay, but on Windows, FairPlay plays a limited role, and it's not entirely clear whether it's being used for Apple Music there as well. But again, the attack works perfectly fine with the Apple Music lossless streams. Some words about potential mitigations. So one thing that the impact offenders could do is limit audio to HTTP protected outputs. So HTTP is basically a copy protection layer that goes over the HDMI wire. Now, of course, this would exclude devices without a GPU. So think about headphones or speakers. You would not be able to play audio streams anymore on those devices. So that's not really an option. Also, HTTP is not really 100% secure. There's many vulnerabilities out there that you could exploit to circumvent HTTP. In terms of the AC audio devices itself, you could extend the encryption pipeline to an on-device key, so that the plaintext does not have to be routed back into kernel space. This would work, but obviously you would render all AC audio devices out there obsolete. And the same goes for doing some kind of extended hardware attestation. Finally, there is moving the decryption pipeline into confidential virtual machines using Intel PDX or AMD SMB. This would likely work to some extent, but this requires the CPU to support these virtualization extensions, which is not always the case on consumer devices. And also, TDX and NTP are subject to vulnerabilities of their. And last but not least, you could employ hypervisor detection and anti-debugger techniques. This is already actually the case with PlayReady, as we've seen. And for us, it's, it was a bit of a challenge, but we could overcome them in the end, and we don't expect that this is a mitigation that would really help, because it will always be an arms race, and attackers will always find ways around this. Right, moving on to a demo. Okay, so what we have here is sure. Yes. which click here first. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so this is Netflix playing a Ed Sheeran concert. And that's why we have to pick something else. So as you can see, the screen is completely black. The reason for this is that we cannot capture the screen, obviously, using any screen capturing tools, because hardware DRM is preventing us from doing that. So what we do is, in a moment, we will show picture-in-picture at the top right what is happening on the screen with a video that we recorded using a phone, so that you can see what is happening. Okay, so there it is on the rooftop. This is the HyperDBG terminal. So we load HyperDBG, and then we go to our nodes, which we share with the vendors in our disclosure process. The first step is that we print all of the PCI Express devices in the system. So that's what we're going to do with PCI tree. And then we pick the HD audio device, which is named PCH CATS here. And we're going to find out where the base address registers are. So we have the addresses right here. And what we would like to do is inspect what is going on in these registers. So we're going to dereference them for the next 200 hex bytes. So that's what we're going to do now. Now, through reverse engineering, we decoded this pattern that you see right here, and we know that these values that are being highlighted right now is what we would like, because that's where the buffers live. So what we do here, what we see here is that the buffers are 780 hex bytes long. So we grab both of these addresses that point to these buffers, and we update the HyperDBG source code to target these addresses. Right. Now we need to unload HyperDBG because obviously we need to recompile. That's what we're going to do now. Scrolling a bit further down, we're going to initialize a buffer that we control to, copy over all of the plaintext data. So that's what we do using the PCI dump command. As you can see, MMHowing is initialized. And now we are going to basically intercept all of the I/O between the HDI device and the device driver. First, we need to play the stream. There should be some audio in there. So from my laptop. We're filling the buffer. We want to play for a little bit. Well, that's enough, right? We have some audio samples. And what we're going to do now is dump the samples to a file, to the local file system, test.bin. Now, this test.bin is a file format that we designed ourselves, so we need to do a bit of processing to convert that in a lossless way to PCM lossless audio. So that's what we're going to do with a simple Python script that we wrote. We're going to open our terminal, then run our Python script. Oh, yeah, also run Audacity. So we run the Python script, which converts the doc into two individual PCM raw audio files, which you see here. And we're going to import them into Audacity. And we're going to tell Audacity that it's signed 16-bit PCM, little endian, 2-channel stereo, and 48,000 hertz. There we go, we have a nice waveform. And there's the audio. Okay, so that was it for the demo. Now, this is security and types of surveillance, so we should also talk about security and privacy implications of DRM. So we have content security at varying protection levels. What does that mean for the user in terms of security and privacy? Well, one of the first examples of DRM going wrong is the infamous Sony audio CD rootkit back in 2005. So without users knowing, when they would insert a Sony audio CD into their Windows system, it would automatically install without their consent a rootkit. And this rootkit would hijack the operating system internally to hide its presence, basically employing malware-like techniques. So what it would do is batch syscalls, and it would filter all of the access to to the CD and DVD device, and basically it would restrict audio CD access to Sony's own media player that they would ship on the same CD, right? So it's a Sony audio player application, and you would have to use only that application to be able to play the CD. But it would not only affect Sony CDs, it would affect any audio CDs from that point on insert. Also, it would return garbage data to any other applications. So for example, if you were to use Nero Burning ROM at the time, or other audio or more generally CD copying applications, it would not be able to access the audio CD tracks. So it was, to a certain extent, effective from a content protection perspective, but it also created an attack surface for malware. So what happened is that this rootkit used overly permissive file system permissions. So basically, it was for malware pretty easy to replace the rootkit binaries with their own binaries, and then being launched using administrator privileges. Well, from that point on, obviously it's game over, right? So the malware could inject itself into kernel space, compromise the entire system, and it could even hide its own presence from antivirus solutions. Didn't stop there. So unintentionally or not, Storm turned out to be a root trendsetter. DRM from that point on started shipping rootkits as part of their software package. A prime example is Macrovision Save Disk, which was often used in many software applications and also video games to prevent unauthorized copying. And much like the Sony example, they all employed rootkit techniques to hide their presence and to protect whatever content they needed to protect. Now, this obviously made them a high-value target for malware developers to find vulnerabilities, and they surely did. So what they did basically was abuse these vulnerable drivers to hide their presence again and to compromise the entire system. I have two examples here. One is from 2007, where there was just a public POC made available on ExploitDB. And on the right from 2018, so pretty recently actually, where the same DRM package was found to be vulnerable, and just the POC popped up on GitHub that would let you instantly exploit the vulnerabilities. Another trend is moving VRM away from rootkits in more recent times to a TEE. So this is a diagram that I showed previously, but yeah, the TEE right here at the bottom is currently where VRM code lives. And this isn't just a TEE, right? It's a graphics card, or in other words, a PCI Express device that has system-wide memory view, which is an even higher privilege level than just kernel space. Now, fortunately, the good news is that at least so far, no serious vulnerabilities have been reported at this level. The bad news is, however, when things do go wrong, they will compromise the entire system. And this time, it will happen from the hardware side. So what about privacy? So we briefly talked about how VRM licensing works, right? So the user requests the content from the streaming service, and then some licensing, keys are being exchanged with the VRM vendor backend. And if we zoom out a little bit and abstract that process, this is what we see. Now, this system depends on sharing a unique client fingerprint. In hardware-based DRM, this is coming from a TE. In software-based DRM, this is coming from fingerprinting, basically the web browser. Yeah, right there. And this client fingerprint is also, interestingly, shared with streaming services. We don't really know the rationale behind it, but we do know that Netflix, for example, uses this fingerprint as watermark content and to trace back leaks to devices in case content gets leaked. Now imagine that this streaming service is replaced by some random website, and this random website claims to be hosting DRM protected content. Then this will trigger the web browser to send that same unique client fingerprint to the website. Not ideal, but the impact is limited. But imagine that many websites do this, and all these websites use some ad broker or analytics networks. This is basically how user tracking works in traditional advertisement networks, and the same could happen with client unique fingerprints. In fact, it is already happening, and while there is a lot of research on how to design privacy-friendly DRM systems, there is surprisingly little research about using this as an attack vector to fingerprint users and track them across websites. And so I would like to highlight this paper, this research by Gwendal Patel, Mohammed Saad, and Pierre-Alain Fouque, if I pronounce that correctly. So Gwendal Patel is mostly known for his work on breaking Wi-Fi, the software-based level, and he extended that research together with his co-authors to privacy implications of Wi-Fi. And he showed that with a very simple POC, which you see on the right, we can basically trigger the browser to send that fingerprint and then send it to an attacker-controlled backend. Fortunately, there is also good news. So browsers come with a number of options that you can use as a mitigation. The easiest, though probably not the most convenient ways, is to disable DRM protected content playback altogether. A slightly more practical approach would be if you just consider creating a fresh profile on each streaming session. And Firefox these days, since a few versions ago, I believe, makes this really easy. Do note that container hubs are not sufficient. You really need to refresh your profile. For hardware-based DRM, on the other hand, unfortunately, there's no easy solutions unless you have a stack of GPUs that you can swap out every now and then. It's pretty expensive these days, so I wouldn't recommend it. That brings me to the end of the talk. So we've seen that hardware-backed DRM provides really strong security guarantees, but it does not take into account the final peripheral handoff, and this was an oversight that is that is affecting Google Wi-Fi L1 and Microsoft Liberty SL3000, and with Dreamcatcher basically we showed a class break attack that exploits this vulnerability. Now we disclosed it to the affected vendors in September 2025. The vendor response is still pending. Considering the nature of the vulnerability, we believe it would be very difficult to mitigate or actually fix. We would not be surprised if a revision of the HD audio standard would be necessary, or a revision of silicon. And finally, as we've seen, DRM content protection and user security and privacy trade-offs remain a difficult challenge for the industry. There's content protection, but it's not always equally valued enough, I would say, as user privacy. And we will have to see what happens in the future in this context. So, thank you very much for your attention, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Björn, for the great talk. Now we have questions in the audience.
Thanks for the great talk. Have there been you said that the disclosure is saying that the 30%, and presumably they're claiming that 50% is some vulnerability. If they're for silicon, the first step would be security denial. Have you seen any response, for example, software patches or anything at all where you're trying to prevent your attacks from working?
So on the wide-defined end, no. For Plain Ready, we saw recently some updates to the Windows driver SDK that we use for compiling HyperPG, where some changes were being made that, in some way hinder our attacks. It's hard to tell whether it was really a patch meant to address our work, and we could easily circumvent it by just linking against the older SDK. Basically, we're waiting for more information from Microsoft at this point, but no, there's been no real fix of mitigation at this point.
Congrats.
Rachel, thank you. I was wondering if there is any specific package that makes video recovery different than audio, and what would that be?
Thanks for this question. I was hoping someone would ask that. So, about video. Basically, the video encryption pipeline is pretty different in the sense that the TEE is also the output device in this case. So as you can see right here, the TEE is implemented in the GPU, but the GPU also presents picture on the display. And therefore, it never gets returned to the kernel space. That doesn't mean it's possible to attack this encryption or decryption pipeline, but it would require a different attack. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for an awesome presentation. I was wondering, because you mentioned before the high price detection, would it be possible to circumvent that in order to reset some appeals? Also, some elements inside memory. Reset, copy it over to one machine, and with memory for instance to extract the information be a little bit faster.
Well, I mean, obviously there's ways to do this without hypervisors even, so you can do a DMA attack, where basically if you freeze the system state, you copy over all the contents from memory, and the CPU would not even notice, because in this case, DMA happens by the memory controller. Obviously, there's a bit of work that you need to do to synchronize when you dump the buffers. And this will be a little bit more involved than when you have a hypermarket. But yes, it's certainly possible.
Okay, thank you.
We have one last question.
I was just wondering how widely used are these hardware, these underlying Europe always has this hardware mechanisms that they can use or not?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
So these trusted execution environments, they're in all modern hardware, I guess?
You mean the one implemented in the GPU?
Yeah.
Yes. So Microsoft apparently a few years ago, the point in time was not exactly clear, but they made a deal with the silicon vendors, including AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel, to implement this TE inside of their GPUs. So if you have a reasonably modern system, this goes back as far as 2017, because we tested it on a 2017 system, if I remember correctly, then you will have a play-ready compliance system, and you will have the TE. Yeah.
Okay, so let's thank Björn for the